My wife said she should have married her ex-lover. He's rich and not an impotent like you. I walked away without a word, and that's when it hit her. Sunday mornings have always been our thing, you know? That lazy kind of quiet where the world feels like it's moving in slow motion and you're perfectly okay with it. I remember waking up to the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. Alina must have gotten up before me again, like she always does on weekends. The woman's got this internal clock that refuses to let her sleep past 7, even when there's absolutely nowhere to be and nothing pressing to do. I shuffled downstairs in my old college sweatpants, the ones with the hole near the left knee that Alina keeps threatening to throw away. She was already in the kitchen, her dark hair pulled back in that messy bun she does when she's not trying to impress anyone. Just me. Just us. The radio was playing some soft jazz, probably that station she loves, but I can never remember the name of. Something about smooth melodies and Sunday mornings just fit together like puzzle pieces. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said without turning around, pouring coffee into my favorite mug. The blue one with the chip on the handle that I refused to replace because it fits perfectly in my grip. She knew exactly how I liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise because I'm weird like that. 12 years of marriage teaches you these little details, these tiny habits that become as natural as breathing. We settled into our Sunday routine without even discussing it. That's what happens when you've been with someone long enough. You develop this unspoken choreography. She'd grab the laundry basket from upstairs while I cleared the coffee table in the living room. We'd spread everything out on the couch like we were sorting inventory at some clothing store, but instead of price tags, we were dealing with inside-out socks and shirts that somehow always ended up twisted into impossible knots. The thing about folding laundry together is that it's one of those mundane activities that somehow becomes intimate when you're doing it with the right person. We developed our own system over the years. I handled the heavy stuff like jeans and towels. She took care of the delicate items and anything that required actual folding skills beyond make it squarish. We'd chat about random stuff, laugh at whatever silly podcast was playing in the background, sometimes just exist in comfortable silence. That morning felt exactly like all the others. Alina was telling me about some drama at her office. Apparently, her coworker Sandra was having issues with the new manager who kept micromanaging everyone's lunch breaks. I was half listening, half focused on trying to fold a fitted sheet without it looking like I'd wrestled it into submission. Domestic bliss, right? The kind of ordinary happiness that you don't really appreciate until it's gone. We'd been through so much together, Alina and me. 12 years isn't just a number. It's a whole damn lifetime when you think about it. We'd weathered job losses, family drama, the death of her mother 3 years ago that left her crying in my arms for weeks. We'd celebrated promotions, birthdays, anniversaries with cheap wine and expensive dreams. We'd bought this house together when we were young and stupid and thought we knew everything about love and commitment. The infertility thing had been our biggest test, though. 5 years of trying, countless doctor visits, procedures that made us feel more like lab rats than a couple trying to start a family. The specialists with their clinical language and pitying looks. The monthly disappointments that gradually wore us down like water on stone. I was the problem, low sperm count they called it. Reduced fertility. A bunch of medical terms that basically meant I was shooting blanks while my wife's body was ready and waiting for something that might never happen. But we'd gotten through it, hadn't we? We'd talked about adoption, about maybe being that cool aunt and uncle to other people's kids. We'd made peace with it, or at least I thought we had. We'd learned to find joy in other things. Weekend trips, dinner parties with friends, projects around the house that kept our hands busy and our minds occupied. I was in the middle of pairing up socks when she said it. Just like that, casual as commenting on the weather or asking if we needed milk from the store. Sometimes I think I should have married Victor instead. Her ex-boyfriend from college. The guy she dated before me. The one who went on to become some hotshot lawyer in the city with his perfect hair and his expensive suits and his ability to apparently father children without any issues whatsoever. I stopped mid-fold, a navy blue sock dangling from my hand like a question mark. I looked up at her face, searching for some sign that she was kidding around. Maybe it was some weird joke I wasn't getting, or maybe she was testing me for some reason I couldn't understand. But her expression was completely neutral, like she'd just mentioned that it might rain later or that we were running low on coffee. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. I kept waiting for her to laugh, to say just kidding, or gotcha, or literally anything that would make this moment make sense. But she just kept folding a pillowcase, smoothing out the wrinkles with the same careful attention she always gave to household tasks. What do you mean? I finally managed to ask, though my voice sounded weird and distant, like it was coming from someone else's throat. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and loaded with implications I wasn't sure I wanted to explore. The question just sat there between us like a loaded gun on the coffee table. What do you mean? I'd asked, and now I was waiting for an answer that part of me desperately didn't want to hear. Maybe she'd backtrack. Maybe she'd realize how messed up what she'd just said was. Maybe she'd at least have the decency to look embarrassed about it. But Alina just set down the pillowcase she'd been folding and looked at me with those dark eyes I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I mean exactly what I said, she replied, her voice steady and matter-of-fact, like we were discussing what to have for dinner. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed with Victor instead of choosing you. The words hit me like a physical blow, right in the chest where all the air suddenly decided to evacuate my lungs. I felt my hands go numb, and that navy sock I'd been holding just dropped onto the pile of unfolded laundry like a dead thing. This wasn't some hypothetical wondering, some innocent, what-if scenario that couples sometimes talk about late at night when they're feeling philosophical. This was my wife of 12 years telling me she actively regretted marrying me. Okay, I said slowly, trying to process what was happening. And why's that? Even as I asked, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. There's something to be said for willful ignorance, for not poking at wounds that might be better left alone. But I couldn't help myself. It's like when you know you're about to step on a landmine, but your foot's already in motion and there's no stopping it. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle she was trying to solve. Well, for starters, Victor's actually successful. He's got that corner office downtown, the BMW, the house in Westchester. He's somebody, you know. He made something of himself. Each word was like a small knife, carefully placed for maximum damage. I wanted to defend myself, to point out that I had a decent job, that we owned our house, that we weren't exactly living in poverty. But something about the clinical way she was delivering this character assassination made me stay quiet. Like she'd been thinking about this for a while and had her arguments all lined up and ready to go. And then there's the other thing, she continued, her voice dropping just a notch. Not softer, not gentler, just quieter. Like she was about to share a secret that wasn't really a secret at all. What other thing? I asked, though something deep in my gut already knew where this was heading. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the protagonist is about to open the door that obviously has something terrible behind it? That's exactly how I felt in that moment. She looked me straight in the eye, unflinching, unwavering. Victor's not impotent like you. The word hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. Impotent. Not dealing with fertility issues, or having some medical challenges, or any of the gentler euphemisms we'd used over the years when talking to doctors or family members. Impotent. Like I was some broken-down old man who couldn't perform the most basic function of masculinity. My ears started ringing, this high-pitched whine that seemed to come from inside my head. The living room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too filled with the weight of what she'd just said. My hands, which had been busy with laundry just moments before, went completely still. I was holding a t-shirt. One of mine, actually, this faded blue thing I'd had since college, and I just stared at it like I'd never seen fabric before. The thing is, we'd never used that word. Not once in 5 years of doctor visits and medical consultations and hushed conversations about our options. The doctors had been clinical but kind, talking about reduced fertility and low sperm count and reproductive challenges. We developed our own vocabulary around it, softer terms that didn't make me feel like less of a man. But impotent? That word carried weight, carried judgment, carried years of shame and inadequacy all rolled up into 3 syllables. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Actually, honey, the correct medical term is oligospermia. Well, at least I'm loyal and kind and would never deliberately hurt you the way you're hurting me right now. Nothing seemed adequate to the moment. Nothing seemed big enough to fill the crater she'd just blown in our marriage. Instead, I just stood up. Slow and careful, like I was moving through water or thick honey. The t-shirt fell from my hands back onto the couch, joining the mess of half-folded laundry that suddenly seemed like evidence of a life I'd been foolish enough to think was working. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been sitting in one position for too long and the blood flow was just returning. I walked out of the room without saying a word. Not stomping, not dramatic, just walking. One foot in front of the other, heading for the stairs, then down to the basement where my little home office was set up. The silence behind me was deafening. No footsteps following, no voice calling my name. No wait, let me explain, or I didn't mean it like that. Just silence. And the sound of laundry being folded upstairs, steady and rhythmic, like nothing had happened at all. Monday morning came like a slap in the face. The alarm went off at 6:30 like it always did, that annoying beeping that usually made me groan and reach for the snooze button. But I was already awake, had been awake for hours actually, just lying there staring at the ceiling and replaying yesterday's conversation over and over in my head like some kind of mental torture device. Alina was still asleep next to me, or at least pretending to be. Hard to tell the difference when someone's deliberately keeping their breathing steady and their body perfectly still. I went through the motions of getting ready for work like I was following a script someone else had written. Shower, shave, coffee, toast. The same routine I'd been doing for years, but now it felt hollow, like I was acting in a play where I'd forgotten all my lines. Alina got up while I was eating breakfast, patting around the kitchen in her bathrobe like everything was totally normal. She poured herself coffee, checked her phone, made small talk about the weather. Looks like it might rain later, she said, glancing out the window. Yeah, maybe, I replied, because what else do you say? It's amazing how you can have a conversation about absolutely nothing when the elephant in the room is so big it's practically crushing the furniture. The drive to work was weird. Usually, I'd listen to sports radio or some podcast, but that morning I just drove in silence, watching other people in their cars, wondering if their lives were falling apart too, or if it was just me. There's something surreal about realizing your marriage might be over while you're sitting in traffic next to a soccer mom in a minivan and a guy in a pickup truck singing along to whatever's playing on his stereo. At the office, I tried to focus on work, but it was like trying to read with someone constantly tapping you on the shoulder. Every spreadsheet, every email, every phone call felt like background noise to the real conversation happening in my head. The one where I kept hearing Alina's voice saying, "Victor's not impotent like you," over and over again until the words lost all meaning and just became this rhythmic punishment. Tara, my assistant, noticed something was off pretty quick. The woman's got radar for this kind of stuff. Probably comes from dealing with executives and their various personal disasters on a daily basis. She's been working with me for about 3 years now, and she's seen me stressed about deadlines, frustrated with difficult clients, even pissed off about office politics. But this was different, and she could tell. "You okay, Mr. Barrett?" she asked around lunchtime, poking her head into my office with that concerned look she gets when she thinks I'm about to have a breakdown. "You seem a little off today." I looked up from the report I'd been pretending to read for the past 20 minutes and forced what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess. Didn't sleep great last night." She didn't buy it for a second, but Tara's good about not pushing when you're clearly not ready to talk. "Okay, but if you need anything," she said, letting the offer hang in the air like a safety net. "Thanks, I appreciate it," I told her, and I meant it. It's funny how sometimes the people you work with can show more concern for your well-being than the person you're supposed to be building a life with. The rest of the day dragged by like a wounded animal. Every minute felt like an hour. Every task felt monumental. I found myself checking the clock obsessively, not because I was eager to get home. Quite the opposite, actually. The thought of walking back into that house, of sitting across from Alina at the dinner table and pretending everything was fine, made my stomach churn. When 5 o'clock finally rolled around, I didn't rush out like I usually did. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a good 10 minutes, just staring at the concrete wall and trying to figure out how to be normal. How do you go home and ask about someone's day when they've just told you they wish they'd married someone else? How do you make small talk about dinner plans when the foundation of your entire relationship has just been revealed to be built on quicksand? I practiced conversations in my head during the drive home. "How was your day?" "Fine, how was yours?" "Good. What do you want for dinner?" Like we were strangers sharing an elevator instead of two people who'd promised to love each other for better or worse. Though I guess this definitely qualified as worse. The house looked exactly the same when I pulled into the driveway, but it felt different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes, or maybe like I was seeing it clearly for the first time. The little garden Alina had planted last spring, the porch swing we'd bought on sale at Home Depot, the welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home" in cheerful yellow letters. All of it felt like props in a play that had suddenly changed genres from romantic comedy to psychological thriller. Inside, Alina was in the kitchen starting dinner. She smiled when I walked in, the same smile she'd been giving me for 12 years, but now it felt like a mask. "Hey, how was work?" she asked, stirring something on the stove that smelled like the chicken and rice dish she made when she was trying to be domestic. "Fine," I said, loosening my tie. "How was yours?" And just like that, we were back to performing normal. But something fundamental had shifted, and we both knew it. That night, lying in bed next to Alina, I couldn't stop thinking about the word she'd used. Impotent. It kept bouncing around in my skull like a pinball, hitting every insecurity I'd ever had about myself as a man, as a husband, as a human being capable of creating life. The thing is, we'd been dancing around this issue for years without ever calling it what she apparently thought it was. It started about 7 years into our marriage, when we decided we were ready to have kids. We were both in our late 20s then, financially stable enough to think about expanding our little family of 2. Alina had stopped taking birth control, and we'd approached the whole thing with this naive optimism that probably seems ridiculous now. We figured it would happen naturally, the way it seemed to happen for everyone else we knew. Month after month of disappointment followed by renewed hope, like some cruel joke the universe was playing on us. After a year of trying with no luck, Alina's doctor suggested we both get tested. "Just routine stuff," she assured us, "nothing to worry about." Most couples conceive within the first year, but sometimes it takes a little longer, and it's better to rule out any obvious issues early on. I remember sitting in that waiting room, flipping through outdated magazines, and trying not to think about what it would mean if something was actually wrong with one of us. The results came back on a Tuesday. I was at work when Dr. Martinez called, and I had to step into an empty conference room to take the call privately. "Your sperm count is significantly below normal range," she said, using that gentle but clinical tone doctors master when they're delivering news that's going to change your life. "It's not impossible for you to father children naturally, but it would be considered unlikely without medical intervention." I sat there in that sterile conference room, staring at a whiteboard covered with someone else's marketing projections, trying to process what she was telling me. Low sperm count, reduced fertility. Oligospermia, she called it, like giving it a fancy medical name would somehow make it less devastating. She talked about treatment options, about lifestyle changes that might help, about assisted reproductive technologies that could increase our chances. When I got home that night, Alina was waiting with Chinese takeout and this hopeful expression that just about broke my heart. I told her what the doctor had said, watched her face go through this progression of emotions: surprise, disappointment, determination, and finally this forced optimism that I recognized as her way of coping with things she couldn't control. "Okay," she said, setting down her chopsticks and reaching across the table to take my hand. "So we know what we're dealing with now. That's actually good, right? Now we can make a plan." And we did make a plan. God, we made so many plans. We researched fertility clinics, changed our diets, cut out alcohol, started taking vitamins that cost more than our monthly cable bill. We tried intrauterine insemination 3 times, each attempt preceded by weeks of careful scheduling and hormone money. Each failure felt like a small death, like we were mourning children who had never existed but somehow felt real anyway. The worst part wasn't the medical procedures, or the financial strain, or even the monthly disappointments. The worst part was watching Alina try to hide how much it was affecting her. She'd put on this brave face, talk about adoption or fostering, or how maybe we were meant to be the cool aunt and uncle to other people's kids. But I'd catch her sometimes, staring at pregnant women in the grocery store, or getting quiet when friends announced their pregnancies on social media. I started to feel like I was failing her in the most fundamental way possible. Like my body's inability to perform this basic biological function was somehow a moral failing, a character defect that made me less worthy of her love. Every month that passed without conception felt like evidence that she'd made a mistake in choosing me, that she deserved someone who could give her the family she wanted. We stopped talking about it after the 3rd IUI failed. Not in any dramatic way, not after some big fight or ultimatum. We just gradually let the subject fade from our conversations, like letting a fire burn down to embers and then cold ash. We threw ourselves into other things, work projects, home renovations, weekend trips that felt like we were running away from something we couldn't name. I thought we'd made peace with it, honestly. I thought we'd both accepted that our family would look different than we'd originally imagined, but that it would still be enough. We talked about travel, about all the things we could do with the freedom that came from not having kids. We spoiled our friends' children, bought expensive birthday presents and Christmas gifts, played the role of the fun couple who had disposable income and spontaneous adventures. But apparently, Alina hadn't made peace with it at all. Apparently, she'd been carrying around this resentment, this sense that I'd somehow cheated her out of the life she was supposed to have. And apparently, she'd been comparing me to Victor, wondering what her life would have been like with a man whose body could do what mine couldn't. Lying there in the dark, listening to her breathe beside me, I realized that every month of trying, every failed procedure, every carefully timed encounter had been building towards Sunday's revelation. She hadn't just been disappointed by our inability to conceive, she'd been disappointed in me. The next couple of weeks passed in this weird, kind of suspended animation. We were going through the motions of being married. Sharing meals, sleeping in the same bed, making small talk about work and the weather, but it felt like we were both actors who'd forgotten we were supposed to be playing people who actually loved each other. The elephant in the room had grown so big it was practically redecorating the place, but neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge it was there. I started staying later at the office, finding excuses to avoid going home until absolutely necessary. There's only so much awkward dinner conversation a guy can handle before he starts looking for escape routes. Tara definitely noticed my new workaholic tendencies, but she was cool about it, just making sure I ate lunch and didn't completely disappear into spreadsheets and conference calls. Alina, for her part, seemed to be developing her own coping mechanisms. She'd started going out more, drinks with coworkers, shopping trips with her sister, yoga classes that somehow always seemed to run late. Part of me was relieved, honestly. The less time we spent in the same room pretending everything was fine, the less likely we were to have another conversation that would blow up what was left of our marriage. But then came that Tuesday night that changed everything. I was in the kitchen around 11:30, nursing a beer and pretending to read some work documents on my laptop. Really, I was just killing time, waiting for Alina to get home so I could go upstairs and continue our elaborate dance of sleeping in the same bed, while carefully avoiding any physical contact that might remind us we were supposed to be intimate partners. I heard her car in the driveway, then the sound of her key in the front door. She came into the kitchen looking different somehow. Not disheveled exactly, but there was something in her expression I couldn't quite place. Like she was carrying a secret that was either really good or really bad, and she wasn't sure which one it was going to turn out to be. "Hey," she said, dropping her purse on the counter with a little more force than necessary. "Sorry I'm so late. I had drinks with an old friend." The way she said old friend made something cold settle in my stomach. Not the casual way you'd mention grabbing drinks with Sarah from accounting or your college roommate, who was in town for business. This had weight to it, significance that hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. I looked up from my laptop, studying her face in the dim kitchen light. "Anyone I know?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. There's something about the way people hold themselves when they're about to drop a bomb on your life. A kind of nervous energy that's trying really hard to look casual and failing spectacularly. She opened the refrigerator and stared into it like she was searching for the meaning of life somewhere between the leftover Chinese takeout and the carton of milk that was probably a day past its expiration date. "Actually, yeah, Victor called me last week. Said he was in town for work and wanted to catch up." There it was. The name that had been haunting our house like a ghost for weeks now, finally spoken out loud again. Victor, the successful lawyer with the corner office and the BMW and the apparently fully functional reproductive system. The man she sometimes thought she should have married instead of me. "Victor," I repeated, and it came out flatter than I'd intended. Not angry, not accusatory, just empty. Like I was testing how the word felt in my mouth and deciding I didn't much like the taste. Alina finally closed the refrigerator and turned to face me, leaning against the counter in a way that looked casual but felt defensive. It was just drinks, Tom. We went to that new place downtown, talked about work, caught up on what's been happening in our lives. Nothing dramatic. But everything about her body language was screaming that it had been plenty dramatic. The way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes, the way her hands kept fidgeting with the sleeves of her jacket, the way she was talking just a little too fast, like she was trying to get through an explanation she'd rehearsed on the drive home. "How's he doing?" I asked, because what else do you say when your wife has just admitted to spending the evening with the man she recently told you she wishes she'd married instead? "Good. Really good, actually. The law firm's doing well. He just bought a house in Westchester. You know, the usual success story stuff." She paused, and I could see her choosing her next words carefully. "He asked about you. About us." I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, giving her my full attention now. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," she said, and then quickly added, "I mean, that we're doing well, that we've been married 12 years, that kind of thing." But I could tell there was more to it than that. There's a difference between telling someone the surface-level truth about your life and actually being honest about what's going on underneath all the polite social media posts and holiday cards. And something about the way she was standing there, still in her jacket, like she wasn't planning to stay in this conversation very long, told me she'd shared more than just the highlights reel. "Did you tell him about our fertility issues?" I asked quietly. The question hung between us like a loaded gun, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief at being caught. "It came up," she admitted. "I didn't pack a suitcase because that would have felt too dramatic, too much like I was making some grand gesture that could be undone with an apology and a few tears. Instead, I grabbed my old hiking backpack from the closet, the one I'd used for weekend camping trips back when Alina and I still did things together that didn't involve sitting in waiting rooms or filling out medical forms. I threw in a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, my laptop charger, and the paperback book I'd been trying to finish for the past 6 months. Standing at the front door with that backpack slung over my shoulder, I felt like I was 18 again, heading off to college with everything I owned fitting into a bag that could probably double as carry-on luggage. Except this time, I wasn't running towards something new and exciting. I was running away from 12 years of what I'd thought was a life worth living. Alina was sitting on the living room couch, still in that same spot where we'd been folding laundry when this whole nightmare started. She looked up when she heard me coming down the stairs, and for a second, her face went through this rapid-fire series of emotions: surprise, confusion, panic, and then something that might have been relief. Like part of her had been waiting for this moment, expecting it even. "Where are you going?" she asked, but her tone was weird. Not desperate or pleading, more like she was asking out of curiosity than genuine concern. I stopped in the doorway, adjusting the weight of the backpack on my shoulders. "Maybe you need to be with the man who makes you feel whole," I said, and the words came out calmer than I'd expected. Not angry, not bitter, just matter of fact. Like I was stating something obvious that we'd both been dancing around for weeks. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was going to say something, but nothing came out. She just sat there staring at me with this stunned expression, like she couldn't believe I was actually leaving. Which was fair, I guess. I couldn't quite believe it either. I walked out before she could find her voice, closing the door behind me with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if I'd slammed it. The night air was cool against my face, and I stood on the porch for a minute, breathing it in and trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I had my car keys, my wallet, and enough clothes to last a few days, but beyond that, I was flying blind. Jerome answered his phone on the second ring, sounding groggy but alert. My cousin had always been a night owl, but even for him, 11:45 was pushing it for a random phone call. "Tom, everything okay, man? Can I crash at your place for a few days?" I asked, skipping right past the small talk. "I'll explain when I get there, but I just need somewhere to sleep that isn't my house." There was a pause, and I could practically hear him processing this request. Jerome and I had grown up together, spent summers getting into trouble and winters playing video games in his basement. He knew me well enough to understand that I wouldn't be calling unless something major had gone down. "Of course," he said without asking for details. "You know where the spare key is. I've got an early meeting tomorrow, but there's beer in the fridge and clean sheets on the guest bed. We'll talk when I get home." Jerome's apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a 34-year-old software engineer who'd never been married. Functional furniture, a 65-inch TV that dominated the living room, and a kitchen that looked like it was used primarily for reheating takeout. But it was quiet, and it was mine for as long as I needed it, and right then, that felt like luxury. I spent that first week in a weird kind of limbo, going to work during the day and coming back to Jerome's place at night to eat pizza and watch whatever was on Netflix. We didn't talk much about why I was there, which I appreciated. Jerome's never been one for emotional deep dives, and I wasn't ready to explain the whole sorry story anyway. Alina texted me a few times during that week. Short messages that felt like she was testing the waters. Can we talk? On Wednesday. I'm sorry on Friday. Please come home on Sunday. I read each one, but didn't respond. Not because I was trying to punish her, exactly, but because I honestly didn't know what to say. Sorry for what? Sorry for wishing she'd married someone else, or sorry for saying it out loud. Sorry for meeting up with Victor, or sorry for getting caught. By the end of the week, I realized I couldn't keep sleeping on Jerome's couch indefinitely. The guy was being cool about it, but I could tell he was starting to feel awkward about having a semi-permanent house guest who moped around his living room every evening like some kind of divorce refugee. So I started looking for my own place. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed midlife crisis or bitter divorce guy. Just a small apartment across town where I could figure out what came next. The first place I looked at was perfect in its simplicity. One bedroom, decent kitchen, a living room with big windows that let in actual sunlight. The landlord was this older woman named Mrs. Chun who seemed more interested in whether I'd take care of the place than in my credit score or employment history. You seem like a quiet tenant, she said, handing me the keys after I'd filled out the paperwork and written her a check for first month's rent plus deposit. That's what I like. Quiet and clean. Quiet. Yeah, I could do quiet. Living alone for the first time in over a decade was like learning to walk again. Everything felt different, from the way sound traveled through empty rooms to the simple fact that I could eat cereal for dinner without anyone asking if I was having some kind of breakdown. The apartment was small, but it was mine, really mine, in a way that the house had never quite felt, even though both our names were on the mortgage. I established new routines without really thinking about it. Coffee at 6, not because I had to coordinate with someone else's schedule, but because that's when my body naturally woke up. I'd sit by the big living room window with my mug and watch the neighborhood come to life. Dog walkers, joggers, the guy across the street who always seemed to be washing his car even when it wasn't dirty. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that their mundane Tuesday morning activities were helping a recently separated man remember what peace felt like. The bathroom mirror became an unexpected source of revelation. For years, I'd been looking at my reflection through the lens of disappointment, my own and Alina's. Every morning, I'd see the face of a man who couldn't give his wife children, who wasn't successful enough, who wasn't Victor. But now, brushing my teeth in this new bathroom with its cheap but clean fixtures, I started seeing something different. I looked tired, sure, but not broken. There were lines around my eyes that I hadn't really noticed before, but they seemed to come from years of smiling, not just stress. My hair was thinning a bit at the crown, but hell, I was 36 years old. That wasn't exactly shocking. I wasn't the guy from our wedding photos, young and cocky and convinced he had everything figured out, but I wasn't some pathetic failure either. I was just a man who'd been carrying someone else's disappointment for so long that he'd forgotten what his own face looked like without that weight. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done since college. Not because I was trying to transform myself into some fitness magazine cover guy, but because the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement felt like meditation. There's something about running that strips away all the noise in your head and leaves you with just the basic mechanics of breathing and moving forward. Plus, the endorphins didn't hurt. I'd come back to the apartment sweating and slightly out of breath, but feeling more like myself than I had in months. The grocery shopping was weirdly liberating too. No more carefully orchestrated meal planning or discussions about whether we needed organic this or low sodium that. I bought what I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat it. Steak on Tuesday because why not? Ice cream for breakfast on Saturday because I was a grown man and there was nobody around to judge my nutritional choices. It sounds stupid, but there was something powerful about standing in the frozen food aisle and realizing I could buy whatever the hell I wanted without having to justify it to anyone. Work became more enjoyable too, probably because I wasn't dreading going home at the end of the day. Tara noticed the change almost immediately. "You seem lighter lately," she said one Thursday afternoon, bringing me coffee without being asked. "Like your shoulders aren't carrying around a ton of bricks anymore." She was right. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been holding in my body until it started to release. My neck didn't hurt constantly, my jaw wasn't perpetually clenched, and I'd stopped getting those stress headaches that had become a regular part of my weekly routine. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years and was finally allowing myself to exhale. That's when Tara mentioned her trivia group. "We meet every Thursday at O'Malley's," she said, perching on the edge of my desk like she did when she was trying to talk me into something. "It's just a bunch of people from around the office building, nothing too serious, but we have fun. You should come." The old me would have made some excuse about being busy or having plans with Alina. The new me looked at my calendar, saw absolutely nothing scheduled for Thursday evening, and said, "Sure, why not?" O'Malley's was exactly the kind of neighborhood bar you'd expect. Dark wood, dim lighting, the smell of fried food and beer that had probably been soaking into the walls for decades. Tara's trivia group turned out to be 6 people who clearly enjoyed each other's company and took their random knowledge way too seriously. There was Mike from the accounting firm downstairs, Sarah who worked at the dental office across the street, a married couple named Dave and Jennifer who seemed to know obscure sports statistics from the 1970s, and Elena, a graphic designer who could answer pretty much any question about movies or pop culture. I was nervous at first, like I'd forgotten how to be social with people who weren't either my wife or my coworkers. But trivia night has this great equalizing effect. It doesn't matter what your personal drama is when you're all trying to remember who played the original Dumbledore or what year the Berlin Wall came down. We sucked that first night, came in dead last out of 8 teams, but I laughed more in 3 hours than I had in the previous 3 months combined. "Same time next week?" Tara asked as we were heading to our cars. "Absolutely," I said and meant it. Driving home to my quiet apartment, windows down and music playing, I realized that for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't trying to be enough for someone else. I was just being me, and that felt like enough all by itself. 3 months. That's how long it took for my new life to start feeling less like a temporary arrangement and more like the way things were supposed to be. I'd settled into rhythms that actually made sense, morning runs that cleared my head, evenings at O'Malley's that filled my social calendar, weekends spent reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. The apartment had gone from feeling like a placeholder to feeling like home, complete with plants I'd bought on impulse and actually managed to keep alive. I was getting ready for work on a Tuesday morning, listening to some podcast about sustainable energy while I made coffee, when the doorbell rang. Not a knock. The doorbell, which nobody ever used because most of my visitors were delivery guys who just left packages by the door. The sound was so unexpected that I actually jumped a little, nearly dropping my favorite mug in the process. Through the peephole, I saw her, Alina, standing on my doorstep like she'd materialized out of some fever dream I'd thought I was finally done having. She looked different, thinner definitely, but not in a healthy way. More like she'd been forgetting to eat or living on stress and coffee for weeks. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, cut in this choppy style that didn't quite suit her face, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater I didn't recognize. Clothes that looked like she'd bought them to be someone else, or maybe just to not be the person who destroyed our marriage with a few carefully chosen words. I stood there for a long moment, hand on the deadbolt, trying to figure out what I was supposed to feel. Anger? Sadness? That weird mix of nostalgia and nausea you get when you run into an ex at the grocery store? But mostly what I felt was tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with how much sleep I'd gotten and everything to do with the emotional marathon I'd been running for the past few months. When I finally opened the door, she looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and desperate in a way that made my chest tighten despite everything. "Hi, Tom," she said, and her voice was smaller than I remembered, like she was afraid it might break if she spoke too loudly. "Alina," I said back, not moving from the doorway, not inviting her in, but not slamming the door in her face either. Just waiting to see what she wanted. What could possibly be so important that it brought her to my doorstep at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning? "Can we talk?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold, even though it was already warming up outside. "Please? I know I don't have the right to ask, but I really need to talk to you." Part of me wanted to say no. The part that remembered lying awake at night replaying her words about Victor, about how I wasn't enough, about how she sometimes wished she'd made different choices. But there was something in her posture, something fragile and broken, that made me step aside and gesture for her to come in. She walked into my living room like she was entering a museum, looking around at the space I'd created for myself with this careful, almost reverent attention. I realized she'd never seen me live alone, never witnessed what my life looked like when it wasn't shaped around accommodating someone else's needs and preferences. The books stacked on the coffee table, the running shoes by the door, the single coffee mug in the sink, all evidence of a person who'd learned to exist independently. "This is nice," she said, though it came out more sad than complimentary. "It suits you." I didn't offer her coffee or ask her to sit down, just stood there with my arms crossed, waiting for her to say whatever she'd come to say. The silence stretched between us until she finally took a shaky breath and started talking. "I made a mistake," she whispered, and the words came out so quietly I almost didn't hear them. "A huge, terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it." I waited. There was more coming. I could see it building behind her eyes like a storm that had been gathering strength for months. "Victor is still the same person he was in college," she continued, her voice getting stronger but more bitter. "Charming, yes. Successful, absolutely. But he's empty, Tom. He's this beautiful, expensive shell with nothing substantial inside. He talks about his accomplishments like they're the only things that matter, like having a corner office and a BMW somehow makes him more worthy of love and respect." She sat down on my couch without asking, but perched on the edge like she was ready to run if I told her to leave. We went out a few times after that first drink. I don't know what I thought, that maybe I'd been wrong about us, about what I wanted from life. That maybe success and fertility and all those external things were more important than what we had built together. The confession hit me like a physical blow, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of anger or jealousy, what I felt was this strange kind of clarity. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place that I hadn't even realized was missing. "But he left the moment things got real," she said, and now the tears were starting to flow freely down her cheeks. "The second I mentioned wanting to work things out with you, the second I talked about anything deeper than surface-level attraction and nostalgia, he was gone. Just like that. Back to his perfect life with his perfect house and his perfect career, and I was just this temporary diversion from his regularly scheduled programming." She looked up at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen in years. Not just regret or guilt, but genuine recognition. Like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in a long time. "You know what he said when I tried to talk to him about our fertility issues?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "He said that kind of thing was exactly why he never wanted to get serious with anyone. Too much drama, too much emotional baggage. Like our struggle to have children was some kind of character flaw instead of just life being complicated and difficult, and sometimes unfair." I found myself sitting down across from her, not because I was ready to forgive and forget, but because this conversation had taken a turn I hadn't expected. This wasn't just an apology, it was a reckoning. "You stayed through all of it," she said, and now she was really crying, the kind of messy, ugly crying that comes from months of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. Every doctor's appointment, every failed procedure, every month when I'd lock myself in the bathroom and cry because my period had started again. "You held me through all of that, and I repaid you by making you feel like you weren't enough." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with truth and regret, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. But even as I listened to her apology, even as I recognized the sincerity in her voice and the genuine remorse in her tears, I knew something fundamental had shifted inside me. Something that couldn't be undone with explanations or tears or promises to do better. I sat there listening to Alina pour her heart out, watching tears streak down her face as she confessed her mistakes and begged for forgiveness. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction at being proven right, not even the bitter vindication that comes from watching someone realize they've thrown away something good. Just this calm, steady emptiness that felt less like numbness and more like clarity. She was still talking, her words tumbling over each other in this desperate rush to explain everything. How Victor had turned out to be exactly as shallow as I'd always suspected, how she'd realized what a mistake she'd made, how she wanted to come home and rebuild what we'd had. But as I watched her, I realized I wasn't the same person who'd walked out of our house 3 months ago with a backpack and a broken heart. I was scared, she said, wiping her nose with a tissue she'd pulled from her purse. Scared that we'd never have children, scared that our life together would always feel incomplete somehow. And instead of talking to you about it, instead of working through it together like we'd always done with everything else, I let that fear turn into resentment. I blamed you for something that wasn't anyone's fault. The old me would have reached across the space between us, would have taken her hand and told her it was okay, that we could work through this. The old me would have been so grateful to hear her admit she was wrong that I'd have probably started planning how we could repair the damage and move forward. But the person sitting in this apartment, in this life I'd built for myself, wasn't that man anymore. I believe you're sorry, I said finally, and my voice came out quieter than I'd intended. Not cold, exactly, but not warm either. Just matter of fact, like I was acknowledging something obvious that didn't particularly surprise me. Her face lit up with hope for just a second, like she thought my acceptance of her apology meant I was ready to come home. But then she seemed to catch something in my tone, some note that told her this conversation wasn't going the direction she'd hoped. "But?" she asked, and the word came out small and uncertain. "But I'm done trying to earn someone's love," I said, and as the words left my mouth, I realized they were the truest thing I'd said in months, maybe years. I'm done trying to be enough for someone who's already decided I'm not. She started crying harder then, not the messy, cathartic tears from before, but this broken, desperate sobbing that came from somewhere deep in her chest. "Please don't say that," she whispered between gasps. "Please don't give up on us. I know I hurt you. I know I said terrible things, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. We can." "Alina," I said, and something in my voice made her stop mid-sentence. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not that you wished you'd married Victor instead of me. Not even that you called me impotent in the cruelest way possible. The worst part was realizing that for years, maybe our whole marriage, I'd been performing for you. Trying to be worthy of your love instead of just being loved." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language, and maybe I was. Maybe the concept of unconditional love was something we'd never really figured out between us, something that had gotten lost somewhere between doctor's appointments and monthly disappointments and the gradual erosion of the team we'd once been. "I don't understand," she said. "I do love you. I've always loved you. Have you?" I asked, and the question hung in the air between us like something fragile that might shatter if we looked at it too closely. "Or did you love the idea of me? The loyal husband who'd stick around through anything, who'd never leave you even when you made it clear you'd settled for less than what you really wanted." She opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it again, and I could see her thinking, really thinking about what I'd said. Maybe for the first time in our relationship, she was considering the possibility that love wasn't just about staying together through hard times. It was about actually wanting the person you were with, not just accepting them as a consolation prize. "I wasn't happy either," I continued, and this was the part I'd been avoiding acknowledging, even to myself. For a long time, I wasn't happy. I was just committed, determined to make it work because that's what you're supposed to do when you're married. But happiness and obligation aren't the same thing, and somewhere along the way, I forgot there was supposed to be a difference. Alina was quiet now, her tears slowing as she processed what I was telling her. "So what are you saying?" she asked finally. "That it was all a waste? That 12 years meant nothing?" "No," I said, and I meant it. It wasn't a waste. We learned things, we grew up together, we had good times mixed in with the bad. But it's over, Alina. Not because I hate you or because I want to punish you, but because we both deserve better than what we became." She sat there for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up again, her eyes were red but dry, and there was something different in her expression. Not acceptance, exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "I don't know how to let go," she whispered. "Neither did I said. "But I'm learning." She stood up slowly, gathering her purse and the crumpled tissues like she was collecting pieces of herself that had scattered across my living room floor. At the door, she turned back one more time. "Please don't walk away again," she said, and her voice was so small it almost broke something in me. I shook my head gently, Not in anger, but with something that felt like peace. I'm not walking away from you, I told her. I'm walking toward myself. I closed the door quietly behind her, not slamming it, but not leaving it open either. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for a while, probably crying, probably trying to figure out what came next. But I didn't go to her. For the first time in 12 years, her pain wasn't something I felt responsible for fixing. And in that moment, I knew I was finally free. 6 months later, my mornings had become something I actually looked forward to instead of just endured. I'd wake up naturally around 6:15, no alarm needed, to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window of my apartment. The first thing I'd do was make coffee. Not the compromised blend Alina and I used to buy, but this dark roast from a local shop that actually tasted like coffee instead of brown water. I'd grind the beans myself, take my time with the brewing process, and drink it black while standing at my kitchen counter, watching the world wake up outside. The routine felt sacred somehow. This quiet hour before the day demanded anything from me. No negotiations about breakfast plans, no careful choreography around someone else's schedule, no walking on eggshells around unspoken resentments. Just me, my coffee, and the simple pleasure of starting a day that belonged entirely to me. I'd started keeping plants around the apartment. Nothing fancy, just a few succulents on the windowsill and a spider plant that hung in the corner of the living room. Turns out I actually had a green thumb when I wasn't constantly distracted by relationship drama. Who knew? There was something satisfying about watching these little living things thrive under my care, about being responsible for something that actually appreciated what I had to offer instead of constantly finding it lacking. The art class had been Tara's idea, suggested during one of our Thursday trivia nights when she noticed me doodling on napkins between rounds. "You're actually pretty good at that," she'd said, pointing at my sketch of Mike trying to remember the capital of Montenegro. "You should take a real class or something." I'd brushed off the suggestion at first, but it kept nagging at me. When was the last time I'd done something creative just for the hell of it? When was the last time I tried something new without having to justify the expense or time commitment to someone else? So I signed up for a basic drawing class at the community center, figuring worst-case scenario, I'd waste a few Tuesday evenings and learn that I sucked at art. Turns out, I didn't suck. I wasn't going to quit my day job and become the next Picasso, but there was something deeply satisfying about sitting in that classroom with a piece of charcoal in my hand, trying to capture the way light fell across a still life or the curve of someone's shoulder as they posed for the class. It was meditative in a way I hadn't expected, requiring just enough concentration to quiet all the noise in my head while leaving space for something that felt like peace. That's where I met Reina. She sat 2 easels over from me. This woman with curly gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes who approached every drawing assignment like it was an adventure instead of a test to pass or fail. She was probably in her early 50s, divorced for about as long as I'd been separated, and she had this way of looking at the world that seemed genuinely curious instead of constantly disappointed. "You always frown when you draw," she told me after the 3rd class, packing up her charcoal set with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. "Do I?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious about my facial expressions. "Not in a bad way," she laughed. "More like you're having a really intense conversation with the paper. It's actually kind of endearing." We started talking after class, then grabbing coffee at the diner down the street, then meeting up for sketching sessions in the park on weekends. Nothing romantic, at least not at first. Just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company without any of the heavy emotional baggage that had defined my last relationship. Reina would talk about her work as a librarian, about the novel she was slowly writing in her spare time, about her grown daughter who lived in Portland and called every Sunday. I'd tell her about the office dynamics at my job, about my weird trivia team obsession, about books I was reading that had nothing to do with self-improvement or saving marriages. What struck me most about spending time with Reina was how natural it felt. There was no performance involved, no careful calculation of what version of myself I needed to present to keep her interested. She seemed to like the actual me, the guy who made terrible puns during drawing exercises, who got way too competitive about trivia questions, who could spend an hour talking about why he preferred charcoal to pencil for sketching without feeling like he was boring his audience. "You know what I like about you?" she said one Saturday afternoon as we sat on a bench in the park, both of us working on sketches of the fountain in front of us. My devastatingly good looks and natural artistic talent. I replied, not looking up from my drawing. She laughed, that genuine sound that I'd learned to associate with conversations that didn't require me to be anyone other than who I was. I like that you don't seem like you're trying to convince me of anything. You're just here, present, yourself. And that's when it hit me. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't trying to be enough for someone. I wasn't monitoring my words or modifying my behavior or carefully managing someone else's expectations of who I should be. I was just existing as myself, and somehow, miraculously, that seemed to be perfectly adequate. My phone still buzzed occasionally with messages from Alina. Nothing dramatic or demanding, just occasional check-ins that felt more like habit than genuine connection. I'd see her name on the screen and feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even curiosity about what she wanted to say. Just this quiet acknowledgement that she was part of my past, but not my present. I never replied to those messages, not out of cruelty, but because silence had become my most honest response. What was there to say? That I was happy, that I'd learned to love my own company, that I'd finally figured out the difference between being alone and being lonely? For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to be enough for anyone but myself. And it turned out, I already was.